Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Pupil Scrutiny Committee, which is being recorded and aired as a live broadcast. Apologies and substitutions. I'm aware of apologies from Councillor Burt Jones. I've had apologies from Councillor Mark Santos, the Cabinet member. He will be joining us at 7:30. Could you all respond as I call out the name to indicate your presence? Councillor Blackman.
Hi, Chair, I'm here.
Councillor Adam.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Ahmed.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Gourmet.
Chair, if you said Gomez, it's me here. Thank you.
Councillor Hatfield.
Yeah, present, Chair.
Councillor J. Ranjan.
Yes, Chair, present.
Councillor Jones has been substituted by Councillor Flint. And Councillor Flint, you're present, yes?
I am, Chair.
Councillor Nolan.
Yeah, present, Chair, thank you.
Councillor Noor.
Chair, I'm present. Thank you.
Thank you. Similar to the arrangements at our last meeting in October, members of the Education Scrutiny Panel have been invited to attend this meeting. Should they wish to discuss any education matters arising as part of the COVID-19 presentation set out in item 7, if there are any members present, could you please unmute and confirm your presence?
Chair, Councillor Hare here. Councillor Hare here, thank you.
Rowena Radkin.
Thank you.
Councillor Jamil, Loxford Ward.
Thank you.
Chair, Councillor Noor also is a member of Educational Security Committee.
Thank you.
And hello, I'm Mrs. Ali. I'm also part of the Education Scrutiny as a co-opted member.
Thank you, Ms. Sally. Right, thank you for that. Microphones will be muted, and this should remain the case throughout the meeting to ensure that one person speaks at a time and to minimize any interference. Members can indicate a wish to speak in the usual way by using the raised hand feature, and please await your turn when you will be called upon to speak. The chat function can be used if needed, but please note that this is not treated in any formal capacity and it is visible to all participants. It is anticipated that the meeting will run smoothly with requests to speak being directed through me at all times. Declaration of interest. I am required to remind members to declare any pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest they or their spouse or partner may have in any matter that is to be considered at this meeting. Agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 19th of October. Has everyone had the opportunity to see them?
Okay.
Are there any corrections to the minutes? Can these be agreed as a true record? Could you all perhaps...
Chair.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. If anyone disagrees, could they please either raise their hand or put it in the chat, please? Right, I can confirm that this is agreed. Well, there were 2 items on the for actions, and I understand both those have been actioned. So there's no outstanding actions as far as I'm aware. Is that accurate? I assume that's confirmed. Thank you for that.
Oh. Sorry, Chair, I was just trying to come in on that.
Okay, sorry, go on.
Yeah, there was an action about sharing local COVID data, which it might be interesting to pick up in our discussion on the COVID-19 update, because we have had some data, but it's been very minimal. So it would just be useful to explore with them the thinking behind what they are or aren't sharing, because I they got the impression at the last meeting they thought they were sharing the data, and then they kind of realised they hadn't, and yet they still haven't really been sharing. But I feel like some people have access to it and others don't. So just to a note that it would be good to explore that today.
Okay, that's fine. Agenda item 4, public participation. As a change to the order of business, I propose that we take agenda item 8 first on the agenda. Is this agreed?
Yes, agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Agenda item 8 is child criminal exploitation. Have we got Anne Watson? Are you going to present this, Anne?
It's Anna.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I've got Anne on here. Sorry, I can see it's Anne on your screen. Is that okay, Anna? Are
Yes.
you going to present? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Shall I go
Fire
ahead?
away. Yes,
Okay.
please.
Hi everyone. Thank you very much. This is an update report on the report from last year, and I just want to highlight a few points from the report. It's not a very long report. So in the last report, I forecast my what I expected to be the volume for the last financial year, and that was much higher than expected. So we are seeing a large increase in contacts to the MASH for criminal exploitation. We've seen a bit of a decline in contacts. However, if you look at the figures for the April to September, then that has increased this year against last year. The other thing I wanted to highlight is that we're seeing an increase in the complexity of cases where criminal exploitation is the main concern. And that covers two areas really. One is that there's the type of exploitation is going beyond one type of exploitation and spreading into others. So we are seeing a combination of criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation. And the other thing is that we're seeing more links between young people. So we're seeing more networks of young people who are connected. And they're being exploited. We have a range of services on top of the normal safeguarding services through children's social care, and recently they were joined by a service called Families Are Forever. This is an externally funded service which is an evidence-based model of family therapy to help the family function better and therefore support the young person who's being exploited. And finally, I want to highlight that we've got good information sharing going on between partners, and this is happening at our 2 MACE meetings, so that there's a good oversight and consideration for a strategic response to this issue.
Thank you, Anne. Anna, sorry. Can I just ask, are we monitoring absences? I mean, given the current situation with COVID, I mean, people might be using it as an excuse for not attendance. Do we know if the figures have increased significantly, and is there a possibility? I mean, you've identified 10 to 15 as the age group of children that are being abused.
Are you talking about school attendance?
Yes, I mean that's the only way. How else? I know there may be other ways of reporting abuse, but in terms of school attendance or where they're mandatory, they have to attend. But if they're using COVID as a possible excuse, and the children aren't attending, are they being picked up?
Yes.
Do you know?
Yeah, that's one aspect of the monitoring of social care cases that's being addressed. But Adrian can probably say a bit more about that. That's slightly outside my.
Yeah, I can come in, Chair. You're absolutely right. The reduced level of attendance amongst some young people at the moment is a risk factor. Obviously, attendance levels have not risen to the level they were pre-COVID. And then on top of that, we've got significant numbers of young people isolating. Where the young person is known to us, then the social worker is checking on school attendance and is liaising with the young person to ensure that essentially, you know, we can see as far as we can what they are up to and the risks that are presented to them. But where the young person isn't known to us, then yes, there is a risk that obviously of greater exploitation. And to be honest, there's little we can do about that, other than to be alive to the fact that that risk has increased for young people at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Blackman. You're on mute.
Sorry, you think we'd be used to that by now. Yeah, it was really interesting but concerning to read the report that you presented, particularly that significant increase in cases, well, above was projected, and the kind of continued recent increase compared to the same period last year. Obviously, you've sort of set out a range of measures that are being undertaken to tackle this, but I wondered what more you thought was needed. Obviously, there's budget restrictions, etc., but is there anything you think is missing or that's needed to tackle these ever-increasing numbers? And I also wondered, and apologies if I missed it in the report, but what proportion of this you think is related to county lines that we've obviously been hearing a lot about over recent years?
Yes, I mean, we definitely have a county lines problem in the borough. I don't have those figures to hand. It's not, unfortunately, county lines is not a specific part of our recording process, so it's something that has to be extracted from our figures. But I know from the cases that we have that and the service that we have from mobile rescue and response, they give us very good information on the extent of county lines from Redbridge. Your other question, what can we do about the increase? I mean, one of the significant problems we have, and everybody has, is the rise of the use of social media in coercion and exploitation of young people, and that is very challenging. It's almost always a feature of what's happening, and all I can say is it's challenging. It's very, very challenging. We have a range of other issues that we can have more to do. So there's always the prevention and through education, both for parents and for children. So a lot of that goes on both through schools, work that we do. But the social media is a particular challenge, and the other challenge is that gangs and organised crime groups are very, very, very good at keeping one step ahead of all the agencies involved in trying to disrupt their behaviour. So they're very creative in the way that they operate. So we know that during COVID or it's ongoing, that they were dressing up as frontline. They were getting young people to dress up as frontline workers and wear high-vis clothing so that they could be out and about and not challenged. They've started doing drug supply in car parks and things. So they're very, very, they work very hard at making their money. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, you have. I mean, I did have a further one, but I want to give other people the chance to come in, so I'll see if others cover that.
Councillor Mrs. Nolan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Anna, for that presentation. Just to reflect on what you said about, the 1,619 contacts, it's very alarming, particularly in March to April to March, and also the 46 episodes of missing children because of involvement in county lines. So that's very alarming. On a slightly different tack, you talk very much about box up crime, which continues to deliver services in the borough, and now ended, which is a shame. But I just wondered how it's been very successful, how that could be extended across the borough, because it just sort of centres in one area, and we know that if children can get involved with boxing and whatever, it does help them to increase their self-esteem, gets them off the streets and gets them to work, you know, to manage their lives a little bit better. And I know that the council don't charge rent for there, but the funding comes from the community infrastructure levy, and that enabled the building work and gym equipment to be installed. And that would be quite nice if something like that could be extended across the north and the west of the borough. And that's something maybe that perhaps could be pursued, because, you know, we have, contrary to what people say about the best of the borough being the leafy, wealthy part, we've got a couple of really big housing services there in Broadmead and the Hermitage, where there is increased crime around that area. So I just wondered what your thoughts are on that, Anna.
One of the beauties of box up crime is that it's traditionally it's been a mobile service. So before it had its premises, it operated. It may still do. It currently operates in the Hainault Youth Centre, and then it was operating in a church as well. And so it can go to those parts of the borough where there is a demand. And so I imagine that Box Up would be keen to offer the service wherever there is a need. I don't know whether their current staff would prevent them, because they are in Ilford and they do get very good in central Ilford. They do get very good attendance, whether they've saturated the borough in their current placement. But they are they're very receptive to supporting any group of young people that want their service. So I don't know, Adrian, if you've got anything to add, if you know a bit more about.
I think, as Anna said, you know, Box Up, they are a resource that we've been very actively cultivating to sort of make them think that Redbridge is their home, and they've been very sort of receptive to that. So, you know, we've got good relationships with them. They are very committed to supporting young people, so they will move around the borough. I think where we see there are areas of specific need, that's a conversation we can have with them. Obviously, the funding situation is a difficult one. So there are conversations we need to have there. But equally, I think we've learned quite a lot from Box Up with regard to the benefit of this type of activity. So, you know, we clearly want to have that really strong relationship with Box Up, but I suppose it doesn't just have to be boxing. Is the learning from that. So again, you know, we want to perhaps speak to other sports clubs, and I was speaking to our new head of culture and leisure on this issue not so long ago, around how we can sort of promote sporting and other type activities for that disadvantaged group of young people, because the evidence is it works pretty well for quite a lot of young people. But yes, as I say, but we also want to make sure that Box Up very much feel part of Redbridge and feel that they've got a home in Redbridge.
Well, yes, and I think it would be good to think that, you know, all parts of the borough would be able to benefit from this fantastic scheme, and it's proven that it does work. Thank you, Adrian, and thank you, Anna.
Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Anna. I just have questions around you mentioning that because of the complex cases are rising, and you have included a lot of services and mostly commissioned and externally funded. I was just wondering, are there any chances, like, have you done any research on how long they will last, the impact of it, and how it can be continued? Because a lot of the funded services, they end and then they might not get refunded, as we've seen. So have you done any work around that? And what your I would say, what is your point of view on that? If that I could ask the first one. And the second one I have, if I could ask very quickly, that the success rates of these services, how do you portray that? Like, have you had any re-referrals, or you think they have worked really well? And how you would be reviewing what we have done so far? Thank you.
I mean, one of the things we always do when we're looking at services, we want to know the impact, but they tend to be about social care and how far-reaching it is. I think all of those involved in social care would love to know what happens to those children 10, 20 years from now. Because we know all of the research shows that when you look at children's lives and when they come to the notice of social services, that there's often trauma or something that's happened in the family that means that they've come to notice. So we would love to know the impact, and that's not happening at the moment. However, the services that we've got, the new ones, we took on a new provider for our gang exit service, Groundwork, and that started in May this year. And there is a very, very full monitoring process. So we look at the number of cases that they work with, we look at the demographics, we look at the cases, the reasons that where the case didn't intervention continue, where there's non-engagement, and we look at where there is engagement, what was the impact of the service? Did the young person state that did they leave the gang? Were they diverted into alternative activities? All those sorts of things are recorded, and we're working on developing that at the moment for that service. The service that I mentioned in the report, The Families Are Forever, is particularly interesting because it's also being evaluated by Greenwich University. That's part of the funding that's come from the Youth Endowment Fund. So they are looking to see how, in a very detailed way, how successful that is. Because a lot of these funding opportunities are with a view to, if the service has good findings, that they will be recommended for other local authorities to take them up. So what I can't do today is answer whether our current service Groundwork or our Families Are Forever service are successful, because they haven't been operating for long enough. But what I can say is, from speaking to the service providers and them telling me the work that they're doing and the families that they're working with, the positive impact, the immediate positive impacts that they're having. So it's working very well. And I've forgotten the second part of your question.
I can pick up the second part if it helps, Anna, because I think it does at times feel like we're on an external funding sort of merry-go-round, and the usual cycle is, we think that's fantastic when we first see the funding award, and then after about 2 months we think, so what do we do when the funding runs out? And essentially we are constantly running to keep up by bidding for new funding opportunities. Unfortunately, it is just the way of the world at the moment. I think government itself has sort of generally quite often launched bidding schemes for funding which are time limited rather than putting money into base budgets. So it's just the world that we operate in. I think we've got a lot better at accessing that external funding and bidding, but it just means that's just something we have to sort of work with at the moment and try and manage any gaps in services that might result because of that.
Yeah, we've got currently a service with Barnardo's, which is called TAFE, and that means journey in Welsh. And it was funded by MOPAC, and it's due to end in March. In order for us to continue with it, to have one worker, it's delivering a service for children who are exhibiting harmful sexual behaviour. The cost of the service for one worker is $55,000 a year. And in the current climate, I think we're not going to be able to continue.
Thank you very much. I think it's important to note that how complex cases depend largely on supports like this, and how much we can continue pushing services if funding and other assurances come by, so that it's a continuous process, not like an ad hoc. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, before I start, just to echo some of the concern of the rise in numbers, and that although in the latest period for the figures there's a drop, it appears to me to be a sort of an unnatural drop, and I'm slightly concerned that rather than an actual decline in cases because of the changing nature of the exploitation and activities and of the council, we've maybe missed cases, and that's why the figures are lower. So, but I'm interested generally as to the reason for the increase, whether it's because we're getting more attentive to cases and picking them up more efficiently, or we have a general issue in the borough. But my main point really is how we're measuring success and what the KPIs are behind all of this. So we've got the kind of general numbers that we're receiving in the cases, and to a point, we're sort of firefighting, right? Cases are happening, we're trying to resolve them. So, how are we measuring the success when we get a case in? How quickly actually that child is deemed safe again, and how do we measure that?
Could I just come in on that point? I think firstly, I don't think it's an issue of us sort of missing cases. I think that one of the reasons for the reduction is the impact of COVID as well, and of course the absence of schools during that COVID period for a number of young people, as we said before, is a risk factor. The issue around performance around this cohort of young people in particular is a really tricky one, because what constitutes a successful one young person might constitute a very different sort of position for another young person. So for some young people, we are talking about success in very, very relative terms compared to the situation they were in, compared to the situation they are in now, because all of the research shows that young people in this sort of situation, it can take a very, very long time to turn around the position they are in. We're talking years of intervention for some young people, and it's a very up and down journey through that period as well. So again, we don't see the sort of linear improvement trajectory that we would want to see. So it's very difficult to measure from that regard. I think Anna's sort of given a sense of, we monitor the activity, we monitor missing, and of course we are monitoring every single young person through review of the case, review of the young person, supervision of the social worker. So there's a lot going on at the individual level, and we also audit cases as well to ensure that our practice is up to date. But it's very, very difficult to bring all of that together and say, yes, it's working, or it's not, because it is so individual to the young person with regard to the impact we're having.
Thanks.
Councillor Hatfield.
Thank you. I do have some sympathy for officers, because I was complaining to Debbie before this meeting that all I do working for local government is write short-term funding bids that I can't sustain over the long term. So I know how it feels. My comments were the increase in cases is absolutely horrific. I know they've gone up across London generally, but do we have any comparator with other London boroughs and our neighbours? Because that increase seems so significant. I really do worry that we're actually quite an outlier. So that was my first question. And the second thing is any of it to do maybe people being more overzealous in reporting, maybe the police, schools, because now we've all heard of county lines, and maybe cases are being reported now which either don't need to be reported or which could be referred to children's centres or more generalist provision. So I wondered if it was actually the children in need had gone up, or whether it was just more people being a bit more
one of the challenges for Redbridge is, of course, that there are a number of looked after children placed here, and the contacts that come in for those children will be recorded in those figures. So although we're not doing the work with those young people, we're still seeing the issue presented. I'm not too, as far as I'm aware, all our neighbours are experiencing the same sort of level of concern, when you think about those contacts vary. They're not all the same, and that's something that's worth bearing in mind. They're not every contact that we see is, when you talk about criminal exploitation, is someone necessarily doing county lines or involved in something very high end, and some of them are lower levels. And when the contacts come in and contact, as a phone call is made to families are often not aware that that's been going on, and they're very quick to respond. They're very quick to safeguard their children, and the issue stops there as far as we're concerned. So we do have complex cases that need a lot of work. And of course, we also have the problem that when children turn 18, we can't hold on to them at the moment. We have to let them go and hope that, hope that something good happens to them. But certainly there's no longer any intervention from children's social care. So the longer you're entrenched in this kind of behaviour, the harder it is for someone to get out. And so we're aware of that. Doesn't mean to say that we don't try equally as hard with the older age range as we do with the younger ones, but it is challenging.
Councillor Noor.
Chair, can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Chair, thank you. Thank you, Anna, for your presentation. I think so. One of the points already covered by Councillor Hartfield regarding the increased number of the cases. I'm particularly very concerned about this number. My question is, what are the particular reasons this number has been increased? Second thing is there any correlation between the family structure of the particular child involved, or there is no correlation between where the family coming from, broken family, good family, or unaccompanied child? The third point I want to raise in terms of the gang. Obviously, we all focus in country-line gangs. Do you have a proper and full understanding about how many gangs are active in this part of this London? And if you know this thing, then what are you doing to make this not difficult our life? Because obviously this is going, it seems to me that way is increased. It's very alarming. My final point is that I've seen the report that, let me just do 1 second. I'm just trying to find out the proper wording. In terms of the service we're providing by, sorry, forgive me, 1 second. Okay, I think I missed the point. But my point was that in terms of the one you're just providing service to the children, yes, we are providing training and box up and everything. Is there any one-to-one counseling? Because these children are, as according to the age limit in here, the 10 to 15. Are we providing any one-to-one counseling service that not only just one-off and continuous basis? Because yes, play sports is good thing, but whether you're putting this idea into their mind, in their heart, how they think about the future, how they come out from this tragedy for themselves, for the society as well. Thank you.
Your first question, why has it gone up so much? I think it's one of that, often the answer to these questions, it's a combination of things. So yes, I think there is increased reporting. There's been a lot of coverage in the media over the last couple of years about criminal exploitation, particularly county lines. It's just, and grooming of children, within the sexual exploitation context. It's been featured in a lot of soap operas, for example. So it's something that, as a society, we're more aware of, and so as such, then there will be an increase in referrals. But I think as well that it's young people are the opportunity to groom young people is more prevalent than perhaps previously. And as I said earlier on, gangs are very, very clever. They know exactly what to look out for and how to do it, and they're prepared to invest time and energy into identifying young people. They'll do that, but there's also, as I said in the report, young people are flooded with on social, Instagram, for example, with opportunities to make money quick. And that's an idea that's not unusual to them. It's something that they, the ability to buy things, high value items for themselves is appealing. And as adults, we know generally that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and we have a cynicism when the offer's too good. But for young people, they're not able to apply that barrier in the same way. And so it's easy how to see that first step towards exploitation can be made. It can be as simple as, please hold £50 in your bank account. I'll give you a ring when I want it back, and all you have to do is give it to me, and I'll give you £10 for your trouble. Now that seems a really safe way, a safe and easy way to make money. And no young person who gets pulled into that appreciates that they've been hooked into something that they will find extremely difficult to get out of. In terms of the counselling, I mean, the groundwork service that I was mentioning, they do that. Part of their work is to work directly with the young person and to explain to them reality of the of what it's like to be coerced to a gang. The idea that young people who are running county lines, for example, that they make a lot of money is not true. They're led to believe that they'll make a lot of money, and initially they might make some money, but they'll soon lose that money if they get involved in debt bonding, for example. So we do support young people. Social workers will talk to young people, and there's a lot of activity in schools to support young people who are in this position. Once again, I've forgotten.
I can pick up the other ones, Anna. If Councillor knows other questions, if that's helpful. I think, Councillor, you asked about family structure. I think. Yeah. I don't think there are any hard and fast sort of rules around family structure at all. We see young people involved being exploited from parents who have real trouble and issues with parenting. But equally, we see young people from very loving households, and we've spoken to parents who will say, we just do not know what to do to stop this from happening. They're very loving households, so there is no rule around the sort of the nature of the family unit, or in many ways the quality of parenting, to be honest, from the work that we see. And in relation to gangs, I was speaking to the police about this last week. The police definition of a gang is quite different to how we would see a gang. So the police have quite a strict definition, which would mean that in Redbridge there is definitely one, possibly two gangs operating, but actually we know there are more than that, but they are more sort of informal networks that don't quite meet the police definition. That's not to say the police aren't doing anything about it. It just means we sometimes have to work out who's doing what in relation to the police service. So there is gang activity happening in Redbridge. There are organised gangs. There's quite a lot of informal activity, and one of the other features of Redbridge is it tends to be a place where gangs from other boroughs, we're at we're in the middle. We're the sort of the interface point for gang activity along the main transport network. So there is a lot of gang activity, but quite often those gangs are traditionally seen to be from Newham, from Hackney, from Barking and Dagenham as well. So it's coming into the borough as well. But obviously, if you're a Redbridge resident being exploited, that doesn't mean much to you as to where that gang is traditionally seen as coming from.
Right. Thank you both. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Do any of the cabinet members wish to add anything? Are there any other comments or queries from committee members?
Yes, can I make one, please? Rowena Rudkin here.
Yes,
can you hear me? That I'm saying so much of this is very abstract, things like intervention and so on. It would have been very useful to have had a few case studies. Obviously, these would have to be anonymous, but, to see quite what work was being done with the young people.
That is a very good suggestion. Is that something that you could take forward, Adrian?
We can provide a couple of anonymised case studies with regard to the work that we're doing, maybe just looking at one, almost as Anna said, the higher end of the risks to young people, and perhaps the lower end, just so that members can see the sorts of interventions that are taking place.
It would be very helpful, yes.
Thank you for that suggestion. Are there any other education scrutiny panel members that wish to say anything? Okay, can we note the update and progress made and thank Adrian, Anna and officers for their continued efforts in this area of work and the interventions they've been doing an amazing job. Thank you so much. Right, if we can now move on to agenda item 5, the budget proposals. Has everyone had an opportunity to see the supplementary agenda?
Yes.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Norman's got a hand raised. I don't know if that's an old hand or she wanted to come in on the last item.
Chair, I raise my hand as well.
Okay, Councillor Norman, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Say something in relation to the last report before we finished, in that I know the numbers can sometimes feel quite threatening or frightening, but I would be more concerned if we actually didn't recognise that. I think it's much more important that we do recognise that vulnerable children will always be exploited, and we have got, we've recognised that, and we've got a fairly impressive early intervention service which responds to that. So I just wanted really to highlight that and say, when you think of what's happened in the past with child sexual exploitation, etc., I think that, you know, it should be comforting actually to see that Redbridge Children's Services are recognising that and are monitoring it and mapping it. That's all I really wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. Right. Was there anybody else? Sorry.
Chair.
Oh, Councillor Noor. Yes.
Yes, I want to just register my interest in here, that because one of my family members is employed by the council.
Sorry, this is under the budget proposal.
Yes, budget, yeah.
Oh, right. Thank you,
All right.
Councillor Noor.
Thank you.
Okay, the committee is. Did you want to say anything on this, Adrian?
Yeah, just by a few words by way of introduction, Chair. Obviously, the report reflects, you know, an incredibly difficult funding situation for the council. I'm very aware that essentially we're bringing a report with a significant funding gap that still exists within the council's budgetary plans. Obviously, the work on that is ongoing, and that gap is closing all the time. And obviously, the report that you receive either in January or February, I can't remember which month, will show a balanced budget, because we have to have a balanced budget. I'm very conscious also of the fact that the people directorate savings are low compared to the overall savings that are going forward. In fact, I know Colin's on the call, but we've only got the one saving from education inclusion. That's principally for a number of reasons. One is, I think we've said before, you know, the opportunity to make savings is relatively small within the directorate. We're the third lowest spending children's service in the country. I think we're the second lowest adult service spent with regard to spending in London. So we start from a very low funding base in order to make savings. And the other thing that I think we were very acutely aware of when putting forward these budget proposals is one of the impacts of COVID has been that, obviously, as you will see in the following report on the Q2 position, we've still got quite a lot of savings in red that still have to be delivered. So when we look at the savings that were in red from Q2, the BCR, plus the savings that have been agreed in previous years for delivery next year, that comes to something just over £10 million worth of savings to be made from the directorate next year. So they're not visible in this paper, because this paper only deals with the new savings, but it does mean that we have a significant savings ask to deliver with regard to essentially the savings this committee has seen previously. from now into next year, which is why there is a relatively small contribution to the corporate savings total at the moment from the People Directorate. But as I said, the work is going on, and I think officers are very aware that we have to produce a balanced budget for the council meeting in March, and that's what we will do.
Thank you. Any member? Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question on the main savings item. It's 22E-01, I believe. It's on page 19. And because there's a reduction here, and it seems to be the main people saving of full-time equivalent persons for the council. And I didn't quite understand the saving. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate, Adrian, on how this reduction will be made, or how the efficiency saving will be made, and what effect it might have on services.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely confident Colin will come in as well. I think we've just been having this conversation with our finance colleagues today, because we don't believe this is purely an efficiency saving, because there will be a reduction in service, because essentially what we'll be proposing will reduce the support that we provide to the early years sector with regard to improvement capacity. Some of it is an efficiency. It's about changing the base, for example, for a group of staff. But some of it is the sector will see a reduction in the support that is available from the council. I have to say, we're not alone in making savings in that area, but it will see, as I said, a reduction in service. I don't know, Colin, whether you want to say any more on that.
I think you've covered most of it, Adrian, but I think that's right, Councillor Adams. We're talking about effectively a reduction in the service that we provide. We'd be doing it in two ways, I think. One would be we would no longer do a lot of the intervention work that we currently do for early year settings if they are a concern to us and as a risk at an Ofsted inspection. So effectively, we'd leave that to them to do their own development work. We still offer it on a traded basis. We can still offer to go in and support them if the setting can pay for it, but which is a slightly different thing. And then the other thing would be we'd be reducing the support that we offer to childminders.
Okay, thank you for a comprehensive response.
Councillor Nolan, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, as always, it's lacking in information, which worries me, and also the fact that we only got some papers this afternoon, which is less than satisfactory when you're asked to comment on a report. The thing that does, I mean, one of the questions I had was what Councillor Adams just raised about the full post, because it doesn't seem to be any other savings in any other service area for losing staff, but I know massive overspends continue, and you've got to keep on with them, Adrian, from previous years. But what does worry me, if savings are not met or achieved with other service areas, will the call come back to social care and health to make more savings? Because at the moment, yes, we are a very low spending authority, but a very high achieving authority. We're just about above the margins at the moment, and we need to fulfil our statutory requirements. And it does worry me that might not happen if you don't get sufficient funding. And also, this is only a 12-month budget. So, what's going to happen next year? Also, the other question I have is, if you are going to take money out of reserves, and unfortunately there's nobody here from finance, is that coming out of the general fund, or will the reserves be coming out of a business contingency fund? So I know the council has several pockets of money that they're able to dip into, but once you sell the family jewels, that's about it really. But I know there are so much requirements you've had from previous years, Adrian, that you still haven't fulfilled. So I can understand. It's a real worry for you. Thank you.
Councillor Nolan, sorry. The only proposal on the budget that we're allowed to talk about is the area that's highlighted. The other issues are going to be discussed at other scrutiny meetings.
Yeah, I realise that. Thank you, Chair.
So if we could just stick to the
well, perhaps perhaps Adrian can answer the question about the fact that will he be required to make more savings if other service areas don't?
I think, you know, clearly, equally, the directorate is a large part of the council spend. So it's very difficult to then find significant savings from the rest of the council. But as I said, you know, we can't go below the statutory minimum because it's statutory. So we have to provide that service. I think one of the good things that we do at the moment is essentially we seek to minimise that statutory spend by, you know, in having money in early help, as we've just been hearing from Anna with regard to some of the services that we have there. So we're constantly trying to address that balance because, you know, there are lots of authorities spending much more on statutory services than we do, because actually they haven't got that balance of investment right. So I think that's something that we're always sort of looking at. And I suppose to a certain extent, the proposals in front of you today, or, you know, you don't have that long list of savings, is a reflection of how close to the wire we are, in my view, at the moment with regard to spending.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Chair, you're muted.
Apologies. Any other member? Councillor Noor. Sorry, Councillor Adams.
I don't have my hand up.
Oh, it's
Chair.
Ahmed. Sorry,
you asked me.
Councillor Ahmed. Sorry, Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Adrian. I think it's very comprehensive in a way that we know why we are here. We clearly know that the underfunded situation that we have always been. I mean, I always wonder why we are one of the lowest receiver of you know, government support, and that is what it is. Every year we get the same things. Chair, just a quick correction, actually. Agenda, item 3.5 section, there is a small typo. It says 1 hour free parking, so it should be free, I think. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you.
Councillor Santos.
I just wanted to comment that the challenge we have at the moment is that I think Councillor Mrs. Nolan hit the nail on the head. We are low spend, high performing, and so we're doing our job. We're actually doing what we can, and we've got an amazing staff team who are officer team that are performing really well. What we need now is for the government to do its part. And there's been significant numbers of promises around reform of adult social care. This has been something that the current Prime Minister set out that he would be one of his priorities, and clearly hasn't been. And this is even pre the situation with COVID. We need that to be sorted out. We need them to also look at our funding and the funding issues in boroughs and such, and address that. That's the key thing, and not the piecemeal situation that we're being offered, and not the approach that they're taking in terms of forcing. If we want to raise raise extra funding for adult social care, it's through the precepts, so additional costs on the council tax. And again, in a regressive way, and not an appropriate way of raising funds. So it's time the government stepped up over adult social care. I don't know how many times we have to ask them for it, to take this matter seriously. But that's where the rub is.
Councillor Hatfield.
Thank you. I do want to echo actually Mark's point that the bit of the report that is really good is the bit of the challenges we're facing. And there is only so many years where we can cut 10 million, 20 million 15 million year on year until the whole service starts collapsing, because demand goes up and the budget goes down and down. Eventually, we can't run key services, and I'm not saying Redbridge is in that position, but it's getting close to it, and that really does worry me. Yeah, my only issue with this is I've looked through the report, but I do agree on some of the proposals. There is very little detail, and it is quite difficult to scrutinise and say this is a good proposal given the situation, or a bad proposal when it's only really one line. And having a little bit more detail would be so much more helpful.
Yeah.
I'm not saying War and Peace, I'm just saying a bit more, because on that I wouldn't have any clue what the changes were. So that's just my comment.
Does anyone else have any other comments on this? Okay, can we note the update and also the recommendations put forward for Cabinet to consider? Is that all agreed? Okay, agenda item 6. Adrian, do you know who's lead? Is
That's
that
me
you?
again, Chair. Yes, it
Okay,
is.
thank you.
Again, this is quite an unusual budgetary control report. Now, unfortunately, it's not unusual that people directorate is overspending, as this committee has heard previously. But obviously, at the moment, we are projecting at Q2 an overspend of £34.4 million. Now, I would leap in at this point to say, obviously, that is a enormously concerning figure. It's not quite as concerning as it might appear when, for example, compared to overspends in other local authorities, because essentially what the People Directorate has at the moment is it has all the costs of the COVID period. So, for example, we've talked about the impact of delays in delivery savings, but for example, we're also bearing the costs of PPE. We've got the costs of the wellbeing service. We've got the costs of the provider uplift that we gave out in April to support our care providers, whereas all the income that the council has received from government is held centrally. So we are overspending, but we've had essentially none of the funding for that overspending has come through to the directorate, and that makes some sense, because we didn't want to spend a long time trying to work out how the funding should be apportioned. But it does mean that the overspend position is greater than it might be if you were comparing us to other local authorities, for example, that have apportioned that funding out. And I'd also add that I think in Q1 we were showing a 40 million overspend. This BCR shows a 34 million overspend. I think month 8 BCR is going to be in the order of about 28, 29 million overspend. So it's coming down all the time. It's coming down principally as we review the projections around COVID costs. So, for example, we've been looking at activity levels in adults and indeed children's, and thinking, well, actually the original projections were overly cautious. We can reduce that based on what we are seeing coming through at the moment. So we're on that sort of that trajectory around, and a decrease each month at the moment with regard to spending. So the situation is serious, as you've heard. We have got spending measures in place in order to restrict spending where we can. However, we will continue to meet our statutory responsibilities with regard to the provision of care, and equally we continue to spend where we think it makes sense to spend in order to avoid increased expenditure in the longer term. And all budget holders are very aware of essentially the funding position. And I have to say, I think we are in a more stable position. A lot of work has been done in adults and children's with regard to budget holding. I know it's been an issue for the committee in the past, so we've not seen those big swings that we've seen in previous years, because I think the budget holders are much more up to speed with the budgets, and the quality of financial information that's coming through to them has improved, which enables them to be better with regard to managing their budgets as well. So I think I'll leave it there at that point by way of introduction, Chair.
Thank you, Adrian. Any comments from members? Cabinet members? Councillor Mrs. Nolan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for Adrian. You know, it's a dreadful situation to be in, and I know that we're very fortunate to have such wonderful officers. And I will compliment the Cabinet member as well, because Mark is doing a tremendous job, I think, as the Cabinet member. He really is. I noticed that part of your savings is possibly reducing reliance on agency staff, and I just wondered, you know, I know that there was quite a number of agency staff, particularly in the safeguarding area, and I just wondered, you know, obviously, again, we've just considered the other report earlier on with Anna, how important that is currently. So I just wondered, you know, would that be some of the savings that you would be thinking of making?
They are, and indeed we're doing that at the moment. Now we are trying to at the moment make a shift in our spending, because to be honest, we would rather have a more attractive offer for permanent staff than to spend on agency. So we're going through that process at the moment, as well as essentially upping our game with regard to how we recruit staff. So we have done a bit of a campaign recently, which is showing some initially very promising results in both children's and adults. We've had a significant number of responses to that recruitment. I think it's, Bob might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 40 in both service, 40 in adults, 40 in children's. Is that right, Bob?
That is right. Yeah, absolutely.
People sort of, you know, putting in application forms to us. Now, the issue is always we get lots of application forms from newly qualified staff, and we're after very experienced staff, but actually having that level of interest is a real positive. So that seems to suggest that that work is paying off, and we can reduce our reliance on agency staff over time. Yeah.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update, Adrian. I have a question regarding the beginning of the slide. It says that a number of wards been impacted the highest. Do you have the names of the wards where they are? And also my other question is, has there been any particular approach to or any special interventions in these wards regarding?
I don't think we've got onto that item yet.
Have we not?
No, this is the BCR.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I'm looking at the wrong one.
It's fine.
Sorry about that.
I will have answers
Apologies.
to those questions when we get to it. So.
Yes, please. Thank you. Apologies for that. I don't know which one I'm looking.
Okay, we're Councillor Ahmed. We're on agenda item 6A, performance monitoring. Any other comments? Thank you very much for the update, Adrian. And so if there's no, there weren't any recommendations, were they, Adrian, for this?
No, Chair, I think it's to just simply
just to note, yeah.
Yes, it has gone to overview and cabinet already.
Right, thank you. Agenda item 6B, complaints insight. Do we have an officer reporting on this?
That's me again. I have Anita from the complaints function who will help me out if need be. I think this, Chair, this just gives an overview of complaints performance to the year to date across the main service directorates. Obviously, complaints performance has been impacted during the COVID period. We did put some of our arrangements into abeyance whilst we were dealing with COVID, whilst also wanting to keep the complaints process sort of ticking over. So you'll see some of the performance statistics reflect just simply the pressures on services that we've been seeing. The report is not atypical with regard to sort of complaints activity from stage 1 complaints through to complaints that reach the Ombudsman. We've detailed those Ombudsman's decisions, which essentially the Ombudsman has found in favour of the complainant, and the remedy that has been required by the Ombudsman. Again, that's something that's part of the ongoing process that we have. I think the biggest assurance that I can give the committee is really at all stages of complaints from 1 through to the Ombudsman. This is seen as part of the learning sort of process, and so we do monitor the trends in complaints, even those ones that essentially are upheld in the council's favour. We'll see whether there are issues there that we need to learn from, and then as we move into stage 3 complaints and Ombudsman's complaints, obviously there is a very clear series of recommendations that we receive, and those recommendations then go forward into sort of service development to pick up the learning from them. So as I say, I think this is a fairly sort of typical report with activity, with the caveat of the impact of COVID on performance.
Debbie, you're on mute.
Thank you, Adrian. Any member? Okay. Oh, Councillor Mrs. Nolan.
And Councillor Noor as well, Chair.
Whoops. Keep back and forth. Thank you very much for that, Adrian. Obviously, I know while the COVID was on, the complaints were suspended, as was the Ombudsman. But have we got sort of procedures in place to make sure that we deal with them efficiently as possible? And I know that obviously there's pressure of work, and it's really difficult. And it's very easy to say it won't happen again. But we have those procedures in place to deal with it. Efficiently, of course.
We have procedures in place in respect of monitoring complaints, so that we know where each complaint is in the process. Sometimes complaints do get a bit stuck. Sometimes that's simply the discussions we have with the complainants around how we move these forward. And quite often, well, not quite often, some complainants are very unhappy with the experience they've had with the council, and they will pursue their complaint through the process as well. So we try and manage those things as well. Obviously, we always, as I said, we look to learn from the complaints, but there will be complaints with common themes that keep coming back, and sometimes that's just a function of the services that we're under, where we've got particularly high volume activities such as special educational needs, where unfortunately sometimes errors, mistakes are made, and they materialise as a complaint.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Councillor Noor. Councillor Noor.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. It's just a question to Adrian in terms of the complaint. I'm not sure whether will be a prepared question, but just for my understanding and for the information of the probably members will help about this information. In terms of the complaint from financial dealing of the council, what kinds of complaint you normally deal in the council? And did the complaint come from direct from member of public, from the local residents, or from outside bodies?
The vast majority, if not all, of the complaints to the People Directorate will come from residents. So it's people who have been in receipt of a service or seeking to receive a service and have got a complaint to make about that. Usually, most often we have complaints around timeliness of response. Sometimes it's around different views on what for example, should be in a care package, or what should be in a package for a child with disabilities, around the level of support the council is offering. Sometimes, but probably more rarely, it is about the quality of the interaction the complainant has had with a council officer, particularly where, for example, families are under quite a lot of stress. They will sometimes take the view, for example, the social worker hasn't been sufficiently understanding of them with regard to the interventions that we've made. So usually it's around timeliness and the level of services offered, but it can be quite a varied range of issues that people come forward with complaints, but pretty much all of them are from residents.
One more related question, sir, if you allow me to ask. Yeah, okay. In terms of the in-house dealing with this complaint, in-house mean by the council before going to ombudsman, do you have any statistical data or from the previous experience in terms of you resolving the problem, the percentage I'm looking for to resolve the problem in-house rather than going to reimbursement. And if you go to reimbursement, is there any statistic that how many percentage of cases going down to the reimbursement? So obviously, there's a cost implication as well for us.
Yeah, we generally try to resolve complaints as quickly as we can through essentially making contact with the complainant. In fact, Anita and I were talking about this today as to what more we can do with that regard. And essentially, to avoid having to pay financial compensation, for example. So usually financial compensation will only be offered at probably a stage 2 and onwards, with the amounts involved increasing. There is national guidance in respect of the level of compensation should be offered, and we will generally seek to follow that guidance. Sometimes the Ombudsman has a different view. Usually the Ombudsman believes that we should pay more, and therefore if the Ombudsman makes a recommendation, we have to follow that recommendation. But really, both in regard to the financial cost, but actually also trying to resolve the complaint, we will try and do that as quickly as we can at the earliest stage to stop complaints escalating. But equally, sometimes that just is not possible.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. If there's no, Councillor Ahmed.
Yes, Chair. Promise this time I'm on agenda. It's 6B. So, Adrian, thank you very much for that. I have a very quick question. It's around how is it something that is mentioned here in terms of representation to the courts? Do you have any kind of like data or course that you follow up? Is it a part of the complaints, our representations made, or how is it assessed? Thank you.
I'm trying to think. Usually, essentially, the complaint stops at the local government ombudsman. Very few of our complaints, one way or another, end up in court unless we're already in court, for example, in respect of a child. So essentially, those arguments are then played out in the court arena as well as the complaints arena. But it's not being taken forward as a complaint. It's because of our casework. I don't think, and I'm looking for wood to touch here at the moment, we haven't been the subject, for example, of judicial review. I don't think since I've been here anyway. It's not a common feature of the services we have or the changes that we make with regard to judicial review in the way that is in some other local authority areas. But usually, as I say, I can't think of any complaints that have ended up in the court arena, as long as they weren't going to end up there anyway.
Sorry, Chair, if I may ask a supplementary question. Adrian, anyone who challenges a certain decision, does it fall under the complaints, or you see it as a process of the decisions made or outcomes?
We'll always try to so if, for example, we're having a conversation with a service user and they think we should have done something differently, then we will try and resolve that as part of the operational casework, because we will not always agree, but we will always point out at some point. We will say, well, look, if we can't agree and you want to make a complaint, this is the complaints process that you need to follow. And as soon as somebody moves into that complaints process, it's sort of taken outside of the casework, and we take it through the complaints process.
Thank you.
Any other member? Okay, can we note the update? And also, I would recommend to members to identify information they wish to review in terms of complaints at future meetings, and perhaps they could copy me in, and also Gilly, if that's possible. Thank you very much, Adrian, for the update on that. Can we now move on to agenda item 7, update on COVID pandemic? Adrian, over to you.
It's me once more, Chair. I apologise. I realise it's very monotonous to hear my voice. What I will do, Chair, is I'm conscious I've got people on the phone.
That's untrue. I like hearing your voice.
I won't share the presentation. I'll just go through the headlines from the presentation by way of an introduction. So the presentation starts with the impact of COVID on Redbridge. Just to give you the very latest figures as of Friday. Unfortunately, we've now had 393 deaths of Redbridge residents from COVID, and our infection rate is now at 306. it was at 282. And in effect, we've seen a shallowing out of the rate of increase, but we haven't seen the decrease that other parts of the country have had. I think we are now the highest level of infection in London, although generally that's a feature of North East London at the moment. All the North East London authorities, and indeed over into the border of Essex, have high levels of infection. And I've picked up the questions from councillors with regard to the wards with the highest rates. We do have that information. I was looking at it this morning. I thought it was being released to you, but I see it hasn't been. So I will ask that just goes out to you on every week along with the regular COVID updates. Yeah, we'll just get that out to you. Testing, we have the 3 permanent testing sites in Redbridge. There is more than enough testing capacity for people who think they are symptomatic. So we have no issues with accessing tests for those that are symptomatic, and we are currently looking at rolling out asymptomatic testing. We are looking to do that in schools, care homes, and in response to the local outbreak, and we might well be looking to go faster on that in areas of the borough with high levels of infection. We're literally working that one out at this moment as to how we best do that. Test and trace, I gave an update on the last committee meeting. I think the headline development there is the council now has its own local contact tracing service that's up and running. Now, there are still some glitches we are seeing because the quality of information we're getting through from the national system is not great, which means that we can't then follow up those contacts locally. That's getting better. We're giving feedback to the national system all the time, and we are seeing at the moment that generally we can achieve quite a high level of performance when we get the necessary information through in just contacting people and advising them of the need to isolate. So our level of contact, once we've had all the information, is high at the moment. The very positive news is around vaccination. Obviously, that is a significant development since the last meeting. We're working very closely with the health service on 2 main areas at the moment. One is just simply supporting them with premises for vaccination. There will be 3 vaccination centres in Redbridge operated by the primary care networks. We are supporting them with those locations. And we are also supporting them and want to do more with them in regard to communication. So both supporting the general messages around vaccination, but also helping to target that messaging based on what we know to be effective, for example, from the flu vaccination programme. So really targeting those communities, those groups who we know are less likely to take up the flu vaccine, to encourage take up of the COVID vaccine. But that's really positive, and my understanding is it's all systems go for next week with regard to the start of vaccination in the borough. So that's really positive news. Supporting local communities. Obviously, we're just out of the latest period of lockdown. We stood the wellbeing service back up because people had to register as being clinically extremely vulnerable, and there was no national supply of food to people for that 4-week period. In actual fact, the level of activity was low. We delivered hardly any, if any, food to people. Most people were able to source it themselves using online shopping or friends or neighbours or family. So the level of support that we gave was continued to be about linking people to those resources rather than providing the food themselves. We continue to do engagement work out on the streets of Redbridge, and we're just looking at how we increase our capacity to do that by buying in some further essentially buying in some people to be out on the streets providing that direct advice and guidance to people. And we have also refocused our enforcement capacity, particularly targeting shops and other establishments that aren't following the COVID guidelines. Schools, Colin will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the figure as of last week was about 4,200 pupils isolating. So that number has gone up. Essentially, we continue to see the high numbers of pupils isolating is a function of the level of virus that's in circulation in communities. Schools are not themselves places where the virus is spreading at significant levels. I think the key success that we've had since September is we've been able to reduce the ratio of children who are isolating down from one positive case with 100 children isolating back in September to about one positive case to 27 children isolating currently. So whilst we're seeing higher levels of positive cases in schools, we are trying to reduce the number of children who are isolating all the time, because obviously that's a significant disruptive factor for children and young people. And with some success so far. There are still some variations in this, and I would say equally, schools are really looking forward to Christmas with regard to the school staff, because they are very tired given the amount of work that they have been doing over the last few months in order to both educate children and keep them safe. It's been a considerable draw on their time. Supporting acute hospitals, obviously the level of hospital admissions from COVID has been increasing. It's been increasing at BHRUT more, again, because there is more infection in the communities that BHRUT serves. We have commissioned 10 nursing beds, which is classed as designated provision. So this is for people who are being discharged from hospital. They need either residential care or nursing care. And they are COVID positive, so they go into this provision. That's been assessed by the CQC as being safe and operating on safe grounds. So we have 10 nursing beds in our borough, and Havering have 15 residential beds in their borough, and we are using that resource across the 3 local authorities for people who are COVID positive. So normally they would be in those beds for 2 weeks maximum, and then go back to their normal place of their normal care home once they've been tested. We are looking for more of that provision because it has been quite tight at times, particularly around nursing capacity, less around residential. So we're doing that on a BHR basis to see if any providers would be willing to offer that provision to us. And all credit to the nursing home in Redbridge that volunteered to do that. They've done a fantastic job to support those residents. Care providers, I think the big developments since the last presentation were essentially we will shortly be seeing domiciliary care providers receiving routine testing. We continue to put out a lot of advice and guidance to the care homes and our social care providers in the borough generally, and we've also distributed the next round of the Infection Control Fund to the providers as well. That's where we're with that. Supporting vulnerable residents. I think the arrangements continue to be in place as I outlined in the last meeting. We did produce our social care winter plan by the end of October. That's now in operation, and the supply of care continues to be good. Although we are certainly in the winter period with regard to, as I said, pressure on the hospitals, and therefore the need to ensure that we can discharge people quickly from hospital. Children and young people, we continue to see a sort of shallow increase in the number of contacts and referrals coming through to the multi-agency safeguarding hub. We haven't seen a massive spike in activity. Our looked after children numbers are static. We are concerned around the number of young people needing support with their mental health at the moment. So that's not a surprise, but that trend has continued. And we're increasingly seeing poverty either as a reason for a referral or in the background of the referrals that we're receiving through to the MASH at the moment. I think councillors will be aware that we funded, as a council, free school meals for eligible pupils during October half term. We've now received the COVID winter grant from government that will support families with food costs and other bills over the winter. We'll be using that funding to meet the cost of free school meals over the Christmas holiday and the following half term. And we have also set up a scheme for referral of families who are in financial hardship. And this is a referral from professional to school, for example, and we will then do a short assessment and award that family, essentially provide them with some extra funding over the winter period. And we're also using some of that grant that we have received as a contribution to food banks across the borough to support them over the winter period. So that money is in the process of going out to families at the moment, as it is going out to food banks. And then lastly, our current priorities we're working on at the moment is the arrangements and capacity for asymptomatic testing. So we have received 10,000 test kits, lateral flow test kits, which we are both working out how to use and then how to deploy in our communities. We want to support the vaccination program, as I said. We've got the new national tier structures, which I think, you know, they are not a radical change to what we've known before. So our enforcement colleagues are very much on top of that. It is a very difficult period for the NHS over this winter, so we are wanting to support those, as indeed the support we provide to schools, continuing to do that. We want to get the COVID winter grant out. And one other thing I'd just say that we're looking at the moment is we are currently looking at, we want to go very local with our interventions because we're doing a lot of work borough-wide. We are going to be trialling an approach this week whereby we focus on a ward. I think it's Clayhall ward has been identified. That's had consistently high rates of infection. So essentially we want to bring together all the resources that we have in that ward and really look in detail at the patterns of infection. We want to look at the deployment of tests. We want to look at the employment of communications capacity, working with faith leaders, community leaders and local members to see whether we can make a reduction by going at a very local level. If that works, then we'll roll that out more widely across the borough, continuing to focus on those high levels of infection because we recognise that we're a borough with a high level of infection at the moment. But as I said, we think we need to increasingly work at a very local level. So it could well be that officers will be contacting local members for their support with that, which underlines the need to make sure that you're getting the information in regard to infection levels in your wards. And then finally, I've got lots of staff at the moment who are very, very tired. So it's just continuing to support them over the next 2 or 3 months, because whilst the vaccination is great news, we are going to continue to be working in this environment for some time yet, I think. And it's just so important that we don't relax our guard because the vaccination is now starting to be rolled out, because it's going to take some time for that to have the impact that we want to have in the communities we serve. So I'll stop at that point.
Good.
Thank you, Adrian. That's very, very in-depth update on what's happening in our borough. Quick observation on the supporting schools, where you've said that the bubble and risk assessment was reviewed and it's dropped to 27 people, children, young people, that would be isolating. Does that mean each class was a bubble? The pupil and the students were kept separate?
Not necessarily, but I'll bring the expert into that. So I know Colin's on the call and can say a lot more about the work he's been doing around bubbles. So Colin, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, so originally, Chair, the way the schools organised their bubbles was pretty much in year groups. So it meant that sometimes you were in your class, but sometimes you would move. If you were in a different group for mathematics, if you went to somebody for individual reading or support. What we've done is we've restricted that back in conjunction with the schools. So effectively, not only do the children stay in their bubbles, but they stay in very, I guess, if you like, structured seating arrangements within those bubbles. You sit in the same place every day. The classrooms are all reorganised, so predominantly everybody faces the front. So what it means is that when you get a positive test now, of a child comes through, you can do a pretty forensic review of where that child has gone in the 2 days when I guess like the positive test was in the school, and you can pinpoint who may have may not come into close contact with that child, and then you self-isolate. So it just allows you to be much more definite about who came into close contact, whereas before the numbers were high because we were saying, well, it could have been so and so, and it could have been so and so. And then we've made changes. For example, we used to take the children out for school dinners, obviously to dining halls and things like that. Now, with most of the dining providers, we deliver the dinner in the classroom, and we take the dinner to them, which again it reduces movement and means that actually close contact is kept to a minimum.
So how's it managed for the breaks? Do they
So
when they're outside?
So what happens is that most schools are now on staggered starts and staggered finishes. So usually what you would have in a school would be everybody's start and finish time is the same. Therefore, everybody's break time is the same. Everybody's lunch time is the same. Now what happens is actually they're all staggered. So you might find, for example, that say in my school, I bring year 3 and year 6 in at 9 o'clock. But year 4 start at 9:15 and year 5 start at 9:30, and then everybody's day gets structured from there. So they tend to have phased breaks and phased lunch breaks. And then you can't guarantee that they don't mix when they're on the playground, but we've tried to put the groups on the playground together so that they're less likely to want to spend time with one another. Year 6, for example, are less likely to go and spend time in year 3. But as well as that, what we're now doing is we've got the staff in the school who are on duty at break times actually taking a record of who plays with who, so that should there be any positive test, we've got a record we can go back and check to try to work it out.
Right, thank you. Just on the next bullet point, it talks about the attendance rate between 70 to 95%. Now, normally, unless there's a justified reason, parents used to incur penalty for keeping their kids off. How does that? How are we managing that now?
Colin, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So that you are right. Ordinarily, if you had an ongoing low attendance, we would start the process of supporting you. We recognise at the moment that in the vast majority of cases, these are families whose children are not attending because they are anxious about attending. Either it's because of the context that they live in as a family, wider connections to wider families and, for example, elderly parents, or sometimes it's a concern about the child. We're trying to be as sensitive as possible to that. And at the moment, we haven't progressed any new cases for prosecution. So the rule of thumb we effectively take would be if somebody's attendance has been poor since the beginning of September, we would look to see whether or not we had concerns about their attendance before the pandemic started. And if it did, then they're effectively already in this system and we are working with them from a poor attendance perspective, and we'll continue to do that work. But if prior to the pandemic their attendance was good, then effectively all we do is we do the welfare checks by going around to the homes, make sure the families are okay, make sure the children are there. We make sure that they're engaging with the online remote learning that the school's got in place, because we do need contact with the children to see them. And we're trying to encourage families to bring them in, but actually support them, because we recognise that this is a difficult time for everybody. And there's a lot of anxiety in local communities at the moment.
Thank you, Colin. Councillor No.
Chair, thank you. The few questions to Adrian, but before I ask the question, Adrian, thank you for your report. I appreciate for your team's hard work, and also the cabinet member, Councillor Mark Santos, for his leadership on this, because I think so this is something we must appreciate and also thank for his serious engagement with the community and service providing in this difficult time. My question to you, in terms of you said in 9 ward has more than 300% of infection. Can you just mention about the name of those wards, and is there any particular reason, or it just is happening randomly?
What I will do, Councillor, is I've actually got some figures in front of me, but I think they're about a week out of date. So if it's okay with you, I will get this around to all members probably tomorrow with the latest information. But For example, I think at the moment, some of the wards that are showing the highest levels of infection are, as I say, Clayhall, Clementswood, Barkingside, Seven Kings appear to be the highest at the moment. What I have to admit, what we haven't seen is almost what we thought we would see, which is generally those areas with the highest population density would have the highest rates of infection. There is an element of that in the figures, but it's not a rule of thumb. So it doesn't follow always that is the case. And we continue to see essentially the main cause of infection is mixing between households. So it's people going from one household to another continues to be the main way in which the virus is transmitted. And as I said, other than a loose sort of correlation between population density, there isn't a great deal that suggests itself that this is why this ward is high and that ward is low, which is why we want to go to that much more local level to get a much better understanding of what is happening in those high rate wards. But I will get the ward trends round to you all tomorrow, so you've all got that. And what we'll do is we'll send that out weekly after that with the weekly update that you get currently.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Nolan.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, just finishing, or rather continuing that point, Adrian, I actually live in Wanstead Village Ward, and I received a letter on Friday telling me that there's been 82 new COVID cases in Wanstead Village, and it is one of the highest rates, which you didn't actually mention, today. I know you said about Clayhall Ward, but the concern I had was I had the letter, but quite a number of my residents, not my residents, Councillor Blackman's residents, my neighbours didn't receive that letter. So I was approached. Someone had the letter, someone didn't, and said, why is so many have had it and so many didn't have it? So I just wondered why they were sort of not being distributed, because it does say in the letter quite clearly in the immediate local area. So I thought it should have been that all residents that lived in that area should have received that letter.
I think on that point, I believe, I need to check, but I think those letters have gone out to almost quite specific streets. So yes, we've tried to make it even more local. So it could well be that within a ward, not everybody would have had a letter. We're focused on those streets which we see the highest levels of infection.
I am talking about my street.
Okay, so yes, so people on the street.
But my two next door neighbours didn't. So, and then the other side got one. So I think it kind of like worried a lot of people that some did and some didn't. But
I'll make some inquiries as to why that.
Could I just ask one question about homeschooling, Adrian? Have a lot of families opted for homeschooling, and it does worry me a little bit. More and more children are trying to be educated at home, and is that a worry for you?
We have seen an increase in the number of applications for homeschooling or elective home education, as we sort of call it. That is a worry, because we don't want anybody to feel that they need to educate their child at home because the school is unsafe or they have other worries. So we want, people have a right to educate their own children, not dismissing that, but we want to make sure that they've thought that through, because it's a considerable responsibility that people are taking on. It also does raise some safeguarding concerns, I have to admit, and that's a general comment on elective home education. Not anybody who is educating their children at home, I would hasten to add. And we're also a little bit worried, of course, that when people are engaged in elective home education, they do need to be educating their children. What they can't do is start bringing those children together with other children who are being electively home educated, because then, in effect, they are creating an unregistered school, which is unlawful. So it is a complex area. As I said, people have that right to educate their children at home. We just want to make sure they're doing it for the right reasons, and they don't feel compelled to do it because of the current situation.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Councillor Hatfield.
Thank you. My point is we're doing this great job keeping the children in bubbles, but every time I've walked past the schools in my area, the social distancing at school pick-up and drop-off times seems to be pretty poor, and I think it has got worse since we've staggered the starts and finish times with parents hanging around to wait for all their children rather than collecting one and then coming back. And I just wondered what we were doing with the schools to try and improve, or as much as possible, the social distancing when parents are collecting their children from school.
I think I'll bring Colin in, but first I'll apologise for any offensive language used, because I think Colin shares that frustration considerably as to regard the actions of parents. So, Colin, do you want to say a bit about?
Yeah, surely. I mean, I think if you talk to any of the schools counsellor at Hatfield, they'll tell you that as difficult it is to manage the pupils during a pandemic, managing parents has been much more challenging than managing pupils, I think, in every case. So I think we're doing two things, I think. One would be the fact that actually we keep the messaging going to parents about how important it is to follow social distancing. Actually, the feedback that we get from schools is that actually it is improving, actually. Parents are beginning to get used to it. In some cases, what we've done is we've had to make adaptations to staggering because parents had legitimate reasons for, if you like, waiting. Because in actual fact, what was happening was they were picking up a child from one year group and then picking up a child from another year group, or dropping off different year groups. So we've made some adjustments for the sibling groups. And then the other thing that we've done is working with our colleagues in enforcement. We've now got the enforcement people in schools every single day before it starts and obviously at the end of the day. Now, inevitably, we haven't got the resource that would cover every school every day, but we've got them out there on a regular basis. And if we get any feedback or any intelligence at a community level, then we've got the ability to redirect people to a particular area. And generally, the messaging is getting through. We had an issue at the beginning, for example, about parents not wearing masks. Now we would say the feedback from schools is the vast majority of them wear masks. But you know, we've had to make adaptations, obviously, at an individual school level. Some schools don't have big sites. So in actual fact, we've had to go on staggering because they haven't got massive amounts of space inside the school. And then obviously, when the weather was bad during the first 3 weeks of November, because it was wet, we had to make adaptations again. So we went for slow starts, what we call soft starts. So the kids just arrive and go straight in. So we did some of that as well in some of the schools, if the context allowed it.
Councillor Blackman.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for all the really interesting presentations and points on this. Yeah, I do welcome the ward level data because that's something we've still not had. We are getting, as Councillor Nolan referred to, when there are letters going out in our ward, we are receiving notice of that by postcodes. So, but I do think even more micro level data would be really helpful if we can. I just had two specific points, or questions rather. One was in relation to the isolating in schools. So I was just wondering, we've got the number of children that are isolating, but can we have the number of teachers? Because I'm aware that some schools have really struggled with staff capacity when they've had, you know, quite a number of teachers who've been taken out of action. My second question was maybe more one for Adrian, was we've had some amazing community mobilisation for local charities. We had in Wanstead Village about they organised a drop-off for gifts for vulnerable families, and they had over 600 gifts delivered, and they've got, you know, that's not counting all the coats that were delivered for homeless people. And I just wondered, given the points you made about increased numbers of cases with poverty being a factor, whether there's anywhere we can kind of helpfully refer that energy, that there are literally, you know, there are people involved in our local community contacting me regularly to say how, you know, they're so moved about the stories of these vulnerable children, like how can they help? And I never quite know what to do other than to encourage them doing what they're doing and help with local charities. But I wondered if there's also something we can do to link them up to the need that you're identifying as well.
If I pick up that point and Colin can pick up the school staff, I think it's a tricky one, Councillor, because in a way, you know, we want that very local support offer to be there for families, and we don't, as a council, necessarily want to get too involved in trying to organise it, or because it's great that it's happening, and it's great that it's benefiting sort of local families. I will go away and think around, if people want to do something that's a bit more targeted with regard to, supporting children, young people, and others in poverty, what we might do to help organisations. But I think, to be honest, our role as a local authority is probably going to be more about putting people in contact with other voluntary and community sector organisations. If they just don't know who to go to, we might be able to provide a list of organisations that help vulnerable mothers or vulnerable, under twos, or those sorts of groups. So I think I'll say about how we might, on our coronavirus websites, provide a bit more detail that, if you want to help, this is what you could do, type question.
Councillor Blackman, on the issue to do with numbers of staff, so at the moment we have, across the borough, we have 37 staff members who tested positive, so they're currently at home because of a positive test. We've got another 223 staff members as of today across various schools who are self-isolating because either they came into contact with somebody either within the school or they were contacted by National Test and Trace. The actual total number of staff that was missing would be slightly greater than that, because we obviously gather at the moment on a daily basis the COVID-related absences, but there will also be absences of individual staff. So I've got a headache, or I've got a broken leg and stuff like that. So some of that gets added on, and then we've got a number of staff who are still deemed to be clinically extremely vulnerable, and so in some schools they are trying to help them to continue to work from home wherever possible. But at the moment we have been able to keep most of the schools open through staff shortages, either by making adaptations to the way in which we use staff during the day, or in a couple of cases what we've actually done is we've changed the way in which we do the cover arrangements for staff, where they get their planning time. So in a few schools we're bringing in short term some changes to the hours that the children work, so the schools will finish early on a Friday, they will do a slightly longer day on the other days, and then that will allow us to deal with the fact that we haven't got enough staff to do the cover arrangements, because then all the staff will have a Friday afternoon to get their preparation time and do it that way.
Councillor Ahmed, do you still have a question, or you put your hand down?
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, two of my questions actually been asked. One was around staff, which Councillor Blackman has asked. The other one was around the ward information, and I think Adrian picked it up. So thank you.
Councillor Jamel.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to, first of all, thank everybody for being here. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Nolan mentioned about homeschooling. Obviously, most parents, as she mentioned, that want to homeschool their children, but again, what Adrian mentioned about, they like to discourage homeschooling because of safeguarding issues. But my question is that are schools that have recurrent cases of COVID investigated with regards to their safety measures that they're taking? Because I have noticed that more teachers are being tested positive, and obviously because of that reason children are being sent home. That could be the whole year group, that could be just the class, depending on the teacher. If it's a TA, it's the whole year group. Obviously that brings up the whole issue of homeschooling again, and parents, obviously working parents, it is difficult for them. But also what Councillor Blackman mentioned is a list of teachers affected would be useful as well, just so that we can keep it in our records. Thank you.
I suppose just a couple. When I talk about homeschool, I mean those that essentially have chosen elective home education. So in those instances, the parents aren't taking.
No, I agree.
Yeah, okay.
I agree. I know that.
Okay, it's fine. I think with regard to the number of infections in schools, I'll bring Colin in a moment. He can say a bit more about how we follow up the cases. But I think generally at the moment, the trend that we have been seeing is simply there is more infection within the community and therefore we are seeing more infection in schools, rather than schools being a large sort of source of transmission of the virus. And I think that is also true, of course, of school staff, many of which will be living in North East London or Essex, and which are areas of high transmission rates of the virus. But Colin, do you want to say a bit more about our arrangements when we, see schools with significant levels of infection?
Yeah, so two things we do, Councillor Jamil. The first thing would be we do an individual risk assessment for every positive test in conjunction with the school. And at that point in time, not only are we looking for those children who may have been close contacts of the child or adult who test positive, but we're also trying to see whether or not there were any connections between them and recent positive tests that we've had in them. If there are, then they get Public Health England, and then they look at that from the point of view of whether or not, in actual fact, it needs a more specialist clinical assessment of the scenario in the school, and whether or not that's classed as what you might call a mini outbreak, I guess, if you like. There are patterns of relatively higher numbers in some schools. What you tend not to see is a concentration within either a class or a particular year group. And the other bit you've got to remember would be that in some schools, the numbers can look high, but of course, the minute that you translate it into a proportion of the total school population, actually, it's sometimes not any different to it would be in schools that look low. And then the other thing just to mention on the recurrence would be that when the children start self-isolating and start self-isolating, we still track what happens to them during the period of time when they're self-isolating. So if they test positive during that period of time, then we are notified of that. And then what we have to do is track it through public health to see whether or not that may have been a contact passed on within the school, or whether there's a wider issue. And in almost every single case that we've had since the beginning of September, it's actually been linked to some form of transmission which has affected them as a family, which leads to that. So effectively, the child is self-isolating, but a member of the family subsequently tests positive, and then the child tests positive while they're self-isolating. So that's how we do it. And then the only other thing that we do is we do track every week. We track patterns between the school level data and the community level data to see whether or not there is a correlation or not. We've got a little bit of a correlation at the moment in the Clay Hall ward, because the rates in some of the schools are higher than they are in others, and obviously there are rates in that community that are higher. And as Adrian said, that's partly why we've gone with a local task force arrangement.
Right.
But in other areas, there's very little correlation.
Okay, thank you. Again, just put on record, I'd like to commend all the teachers and staff putting all the hard effort and hard work to keep the schools running at a time like this, and everybody really, because obviously, we're all parents, we're all working, and we've all got children, so it is hard, but it's just trying to work together. Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to just go back to the population of children that are essentially absent from school, not because they're self-isolating, they're simply absent. I note the number of children self-isolating. I think the latest figure was 4,200, which I think puts it just above, 10% of the population, low teens of the school population that are self-isolating. But the attendance is much lower, indicating that we could have. Well, I don't know the exact number. Perhaps it could be provided. But it's perhaps in thousands the number of children that actually aren't attending school, full stop, at the moment. And so I was just wondering if we do have that figure and if we're actually tracking it. And also, Colin mentioned that we are doing safeguarding visits to a lot of those families, which I welcome. But just information on, are we contacting all of those families?
Shall I start and then I'll bring you, Colin? I think in relation to the monitoring of attendance, we are monitoring attendance, but equally Department for Education are monitoring attendance. So they are essentially downloading, schools have to download their attendance figures on a daily basis to the DFE, where it's also monitored. Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our general picture at the moment is that it continues to be quite variable as to regard to attendance rates in schools. So you're right, Councillor. There are, a number of children who are not isolating, who are not in school. That might be because parents are worried that those children might be clinically extremely vulnerable. They might just have general worries. As Colin said, we're not using our attendance powers at the moment. And I don't think any authorities are using those powers. So essentially what our job is to do is to convince those parents that the school is a safe place to go, because we don't think using our powers would change that position for those families. But Colin might be able to say a bit more about attendance more generally.
Yeah, well, the only things I'd add, I think, Adrian, would be you're right. Tracking day to day is done by the DFE because the schools have to send the data into them every day. Part of the reason I think why it fluctuates as much as it does, Councillor Adams, is that when you're doing that detailed review about who came into close contact, sometimes what happens is parents who've heard about a case in a year group and their child has not been contacted as a close contact become anxious, and therefore what they do is they almost make a unilateral decision as a family to self-isolate because they're worried about their child. So that means that the numbers fluctuate quite a bit in school to school as the figures move around. In terms of tracking, what happens is every single day when a new case is appointed to us, after we've done that review about who the close contacts are, the schools upload and send to us a list of all those children by name. And then we review that and we check, for example, which ones are free school meals, which ones are open to statutory services, and then we follow that up with individual social workers. Any that have got a concern where actually there's an issue that if you like, they might not be open to a statutory service, but the school's got a concern. So if they're open to social workers, then effectively the social work staff will go off and visit those families and make almost daily contact while they're self-isolating and or absent. And then for those who are not open to children's social care, the education welfare staff go out on a regular basis to visit them to try to make sure that we check up with them. And then the other bit that we do is, of course, we don't just monitor the attendance on site, but those children are also accessing the remote learning arrangements while they're at home, and the schools monitor who does and doesn't log on. And some of that stuff is pretty sophisticated. You can not only log on when they log on and when they log off, but actually what they actually interact with, whether or not they watch the whole lesson, if they're doing a dual. Some of the kids are in sight, some of the kids are watching through, say, for example, Teams or Zoom. So there's quite a lot of measures in place to try to track them, make sure they're safe.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Thank you, Adrian. Just so the contact that's happening, for example, with the children, you mentioned school meals, etc. So that's happening with children that have got to isolate, but not necessarily children who are just not coming to school. But I suppose my concern is that we've got this cohort who are not going into school full stop, and a cohort which could actually be quite large, and basically we need to track that because those kids are going to fall behind. I understand the decision not to prosecute at this time, but I do think it's something that we need to be really vigilant on because this is quite a vulnerable group of people.
Sorry, Councillor Adams, I've not explained that terribly well. So what happens is you've got a list of all the children who are absent from school. That will then vary according to self-isolation decisions. So the names on that list will change. So if we get a case tomorrow, 30 kids in class X have to self-isolate, they go onto that list. So they're added to the list of the kids that are already absent. So the absent kids are on it, and the self-isolates are added on or taken off when their self-isolation periods end.
So essentially we're picking up all the children who aren't at school, Councillor, whether they're self-isolating or not.
Thank you for clarifying. Appreciate that.
Councillor Hare.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for inviting me tonight. Firstly, I have to declare I'm one of those parents who drops my kids off at different times at Snaresbrook School, but they are managing the system really well. So I do offer my support to the teachers. They're doing a great job. I've just got a few questions, sort of linked to the home education point. Those kids that are having to, you know, be at home, what sort of numbers of kids need IT and Wi-Fi support? Are we seeing that as an issue in Redbridge? So that's my first question. Secondly, in terms of, I suppose, early learning providers and the organisations provide breakfast clubs and after school clubs, which is quite important. I think I might be wrong, but there might be a drop off in usage, certainly in our breakfast clubs and after school clubs. But hopefully, when we come out of this pandemic, I'm worried that are these organisations, some of these organisations, will they still be around? Do we know? Have you got a feeling for how these organisations are coping? Will they be there once we come out of this? And I did have one other question, but I think that in the main, yes, so they've been answered. So yeah, I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Over to you, Colin, I think.
The first thing I'd say would be Snaresbrook School, one of the few schools in the borough that hasn't had a positive test among children or adults yet. I think there are only 3 that haven't had a positive test. So you must be doing something right, even if you're driving your kids down. So on the IT and the Wi-Fi support, probably varies from school to school in terms of numbers. But an example of it would be that when we did a review of the year 10 disadvantaged pupils, when government brought that system in originally, they were thinking about offering year 10 students in the last academic year numbers. We had in that year 10, we reckon it was about 12 to 15% of the whole year group needed kit. Actually, sometimes that was they needed a laptop because they were accessing on a smartphone. Sometimes they had nothing at all at home. Sometimes the problem for a family is that they've got stuff, but if they've got more than one child at home at a time, they haven't got enough kit for them both to access, is another issue. And then the other one that we get a problem with is when families have got kit and they've got Wi-Fi access, but the download speeds are too slow to run it because they can't afford the broadband. I guess if you like provision. So what we're doing at the moment is that we've taken advantage of every opportunity that government have given us to buy extra laptops, to order laptops for students. Most of the schools have put their orders in already and have actually received their orders. So every time you had your first positive cases, you could then identify how many kids you had, and those effectively are on a rotation, and we're moving those around the borough as and where we need them if we get peaks and troughs. The schools are pretty good, I think, actually, at making additional kit available to people as and where they need it. We are running a form of, I guess, if you like, hardship support, where if individual families don't seem to be able to access the remote learning offers during their self-isolation periods, then we're working with the schools to see what we can do with those individual families to improve their provision and their broadband speeds. And I have to say, it's something that we're considering looking at through the winter grant monies that we've got available, because one of the consequences of that is if their children are at home more often, they are going to need that IT access. So we're doing as much as we can, I think, at the moment, and it's generally working okay. But the problem will always come if you get a spike in a particular school. Is say if you've got 3 kids and coincidentally they all happen to be self-isolating at the same time, it really does become a challenge for families, and we recognise that. In terms of breakfast and after school clubs, the vast majority of them are still working at the moment. They have to work on revised arrangements, so you tend to find that they've probably school-specific bubbles that they work with. So they take the child from school A and they go into the after-school bubble. If they take them from more than one school, they try not to mix the children from the different schools, because it's kind of like saying there's no point in the school running them in very tight bubbles during the day and then they mix with kids from other schools at night time. Funnily enough, actually, coincidentally, we had a review today about after-school providers and also early years childcare settings. And because the numbers are not what they would be ordinarily, but actually we think they're coping reasonably well. We do think there'll be an element of loss for some of them, unfortunately, from a business point of view. So we don't think they will all survive all the way through the pandemic. But when we tracked it this morning, part of that is down to competition, in actual fact. And so some of them stayed open during the beginning bit of the pandemic. Others didn't. Because they didn't feel that they were able to. And of course, parents then made a choice to move somewhere else. And there's currently enough capacity in the system, we think, to manage it. So at the moment, most of them look as if they're doing okay. Not great, but they're getting by. They're surviving.
Sorry, Councillor Hare, your voice is dropped. Can you
Sorry,
speak
I've
up?
done that. I keep doing that. Sorry. If I may, Chair, I just want to ask one follow-up question. The government recently announced a school workforce fund was launched. Just out of interest, has any schools in Redbridge utilise that money? Because you have to be in a certain predicament to actually take advantage of that. I think in terms of your reserves or in terms of numbers of teachers out. I just wanted to know if any schools has utilised those monies. Thank you.
I think we've got 2 schools, Councillor, here that have decided that they're going to apply for those monies and have already put forward a bid, but I don't know whether or not they've been successful. No, I haven't heard yet.
Okay. Thank you, Colin, and thank you for Adrian for the report. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Norman and Councillor Santos, did you want to add anything?
I'm just to say my thanks to the team for all of the amazing work that they've been doing. There's a tremendous amount of work to be done and being done, and it's just really amazing to see and really inspiring to see as well. So a huge thank you to people. And just to remind that we're not done yet. That whilst there is hope at the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, that we still need to be following with the vaccines coming down. We still need to be following the restrictions. The big worry, I think, is over for me is over Christmas time and some of the messages that we need to we will be giving out about, particularly that it's not the 3 bubbles is not an instruction, but it's something that you can do, and people need to assess the risk for them and their families and their friends over that period of time. And we'll be certainly doing messaging around that in the coming weeks. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you, because it's just a tremendous amount of work and really good work that's going on, and some lots of hard thinking and quick thinking that having to be done to manage the numbers that we have.
Yeah, I just like, thank you, Chair. I'd just like really to say my thanks to all our staff in social care and in education and inclusion for the fantastic job they've done over this pandemic. And as Adrian said, I'm sure they're all really tired and looking forward to some sort of break over Christmas. But as I say, they've all worked incredibly hard, to make to keep things going for our children. And I've been looking at performance indicators over children's social care, and I've been absolutely knocked out, really, that our performance has kept up despite COVID and despite the difficulties. It hasn't dipped, and I just think that's testament to the hard work our staff have put in. And I just echo Councillor Santos and say thank you very much.
Would any member of the Education Scrutiny, do they have anything to add?
Well, just to support what has been said about the amount of good work that has been done.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so we note the update, and we're very grateful for the officers for the amazing work that they've done, along with the cabinet members. Thank you all very much. Can we now move on to agenda item 9, date of next meeting, and the indicative business updates on associated groups. So I have the next meeting scheduled on the 8th of February 2021. And so far, the list of items include revenue and capital budget and council tax 21-22 and medium-term financial strategy, update on COVID pandemic with an invitation to the Education Scrutiny Panel members, update recommendations of the social inclusion of older people task and finish group, and Scrutiny Committee performance monitoring as relevant, but this is to be confirmed. Are there any other things that members wish to comment on now? That's Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether that would be appropriate still, but I was hoping if we could get some idea about, the 11 plus exams that happened. We received many letters relating to the management of it and how people who are coming outside of the borough about the exam that happened took place this weekend. So it would be good. I don't know whether the education panel has already touched upon it. If not, it would be good to understand how the exam worked during COVID, to get an idea of that. And the second thing I would like to propose is we had one briefing today about digital inclusion. If we could have something added to that as well, if the work is being done. So social inclusion and digital inclusion in light of digital inclusion. These are the two things. Thank you, Chair.
Adrian, is that too specific, or is that part of the education scrutiny panel members? Where would it fit in?
I think my suggestion would be it's probably better with education scrutiny initially, and quite possibly to broaden that out. Now, clearly, it's been a difficult time to run the 11 plus as well as the other exams. So maybe a sort of broader session on exams, because I know that will be a very topical issue for young people moving into the summer. So that might be an appropriate subject. I think, the issue of digital inclusion, I think, will be coming up increasingly often. So that would seem to be an appropriate subject for this committee.
Yeah, sounds a good suggestion. Any other member? Can I also mention that member development, rather than a member seminar, what is being proposed is maybe ongoing, because of the ongoing priorities, that a briefing paper be circulated to members. Is that something that members agree to?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. If nobody objects, I assume everyone's in agreement. That's great. Regarding the Young People Services Task and Finish Group, this work was on hold due to the pandemic. However, a meeting was arranged through the External Scrutiny Panel to hear the views of young people, particularly regarding the pandemic. It is anticipated that this work would resume as soon as possible. Are there any comments on this? Any member? Councillor Ahmed.
Yes, Chair, I had a suggestion. If we could include this work as a part of our recovery plan. So obviously we are now, since the vaccine's coming in, and gradually there will be a time when we will be looking at recovery. And if we could embed that piece of work during this as a part of a recovery plan, I think that would very much fit in. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so now moving on to agenda item, any other business. There are no other business that I've got. The motion to exclude, there's no exempt business, and therefore there's nothing further to add. Nobody needs to be excluded at this point. Finally, I'd like to thank all the officers, members of this committee and the Education Scrutiny Panel members for their attendance and all the hard work that everyone's done. And I'd like to hope that everyone has a safe and healthy Christmas break and a happy New Year. Thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year.
Bye.
Thank you, and you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.